Okay, hi Billie. Thank you for joining me today. I am the first host interviewer for ELTcpd podcast, and I'm really happy to be here with you today so that we can chat a little bit about you and what you do, and maybe your plans for the future. So let's start about talking about you. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to come on and interview. Really excited to be the one being interviewed this time. It's definitely unusual being on the other side. So my background is I've been at ELT for around 12, 13 years-ish. I first started out as a teacher. My first teaching post was in Italy, actually. I was teaching young learners with a lot of singing and dancing. We used to do sort of morning song circles and things like that. It was very theatrical. But yeah, I used to sort of be an actor and a dancer way back in the day. So it sort of molded together well. Yeah, so I was teaching lots of different age groups. I worked my way sort of through secondary and then adult and one-to-one. In different countries, even teaching classes of sort of 70 students in China as well, which was a learning experience. And then I came back to the UK in around 2016, I believe. And I moved to sort of the Cambridge area, and I was working at a private language school there. And I did my Delta, and then I did some teacher training. That's where I sort of got into that. And I loved it. So I continued sort of teacher training, teaching and materials writing alongside as well. So juggling everything as many ELTers do. I got the opportunity to write a sample for a publisher, and it was just sort of like a workbook, photocopyable activities. And that went really well, and more writing work started to come in. So I eventually left teaching and started teacher training and freelance materials writing as well. Mm-hmm. That's been about 4 years, and I focus mainly on sort of digital and assessments. I write a lot of assessments like the Pearson Test of English. The British Council has an exam called English Score, and also for the FCE and the Key for Schools as well. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I launched the ELTcpd podcast. I can't remember whether it was 1 or 2 years ago, but there's been a lot of episodes and some amazing guests on, and hoping to develop that into other things next year. And then earlier this year, I set up Otter ELT, which is a digital content agency, or some people might know it as a packager for publishers and educational institutions. So we basically are a one-stop solution to project manage and do editorial and content work for publishers as well, if they don't have sort of the resources in-house to be able to do that.
Wow, lots of different hats, Billie, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case with most people in ELT, isn't it? Like everyone wears a lot of different hats, so it's very hard to sort of pinpoint your exact job title. So that's why our LinkedIn profiles got lots of information on them.
So true. Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes you can't answer that question, like, what do you do? Well,
exactly.
Where do I start? So
exactly.
yeah. So what made you get into materials writing initially? I mean, you mentioned how you got into it, but what was your, motivation? Why did you decide to do it?
That's a really great question. I think I've always had such a passion for writing. Taking ELT out of the equation, when I was young, I used to write. I started writing like poetry and things like that, and I had a poem published. I think I was sort of 10 years old in a book, and I was really proud. And I used to write stories and poems, and I absolutely loved creative writing. But I never really knew that was a possibility of a job, really. I think when you're young, you sort of say, oh, I want to be a pop star or a writer, but you don't really know how to get there, And then when I was sort of in my late teenage years, I started traveling a lot. And later combining that with teaching. And I used to have an online travel blog website. And it built up quite a lot. Like I had guest contributors and things like that. And I started making a bit of money from it. And I just loved it. And my dream was always to write for sort of National Geographic in any capacity. But then the sort of ELT crept in more than the travel writing. So I sort of stopped that. And yeah, then I realized that I could actually write the materials that I was teaching with, which was a revelation. And yeah, when I got the chance to do a sample, I felt very lucky. One of the writers had dropped out of a project, and I had a contact at Pearson at the time, and yeah, they basically said, would you like to do a sample? I was writing a photocopiable book with a colleague of mine at the time, so it was a similar sort of project that they asked me to do the sample for, and I got it. And yeah, that's sort of where it began, and I wouldn't do anything else now. I absolutely love writing materials. It's such a passion of mine, and to see it, whether it's in print or digital, or even some of the items that you've written, I think there's no greater feeling, really.
This is really, really great to hear that, because, you know, as you said, it's not easy to actually get into materials writing, not because it's not about the context, it's about, you know, you really, really need to have passion for it. It's not something, you know, that you do just because, but
Exactly.
you do it because you really love it and you want to do it.
Exactly.
So I think it's really nice that you call it your passion.
Mm-hmm.
So then you took a leap into freelancing, right? So how easy or how challenging was it to take that leap into freelancing?
Yeah, I think I remember at the time sort of being really torn at when to find that pivotal moment to just stop teaching, because it's nerve-wracking, you know, as lots of people find themselves in this situation where they're trying to juggle essentially 2 full-time jobs. My teaching at the time didn't pay very well, and I sort of realized that the work I was doing for writing was sort of topping my income essentially. And I think that was the point where I realized, like, I either have to do this full time or I have to stop it, because ultimately I can't keep juggling two full-time jobs at once. I never really knew about freelancing. I didn't know any freelancers. I didn't have a network. But I went to the Publishing Professionals Away Day in Oxford about 4 years ago, just before I went freelance. And I was sort of taking information from everybody. I remember Sue Kay, the famous Sue Kay. I went up to her and I asked her sort of for as much information as I could. I didn't know about IATEFL, for example. I didn't know about the materials writing special interest group. And I just tried to absorb as much information as I could, really like a sponge. And I found my notebook the other day that I'd written everything down, and it's intimidating networking, but it's something that you really have to do in order to just take that leap into freelancing, because it's all about building a brand essentially around yourself, which sounds really difficult, because especially if you're sort of introverted, as I think most of us are in ELT, but we sort of become that extrovert teacher, which is like acting, isn't it, away. So yeah, I think networking was sort of one of the really important things that I needed early on, and that's luckily continued throughout. And just building connections as well, because you might speak to someone and they might say, oh well, I know they're looking for this person in this company who needs to do this job or something. So just meeting people and knowing when that moment is to take that leap as well, financially as well as mentally, if you can sort of do that as well.
Yeah, I agree, because as you said, teaching doesn't pay very well. So I think that lots of us actually moved into different directions just because of that, right? Because we couldn't handle juggling so many things at the same time. So we kind of had to make that decision, right? What do I do? Should I stop teaching and then do something completely different, or just move into a different ELT area? So yeah, I agree that when it comes to freelancing, networking is the key, right? And I'm glad that you mentioned MOSIG, Materials Writing Special Interest Group, because you know, that's my IATEFL family. That's where I kind of started, and that's how I got interested in materials writing as well. Amazing. So it's really nice to you know, go to their events or any event that is connected to writing materials for ELT.
And is that,
so,
did you get into the MOSIG group and then you went freelance? Is that sort of the route that you took?
Well, I think that, I think that for me, the whole, you know, thinking about freelancing started when I actually joined MOSIG, because that's when I kind of started learning more about materials writing and networking and what I need to do and how to do it, but I actually am not full-time freelancer because I still teach every day. So that's, I'm still juggling those two things. But I think that freelancing is not as easy as some people might think. So it's nice to kind of be able to talk to someone who's already a freelancer. So that brings me to my next question. So do you have any tips, for those who maybe want to move into the freelancing world?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Definitely. I think, as we touched on, just networking, making connections, and also finding like a resource, whether that's a person or a group of people that you can just bounce ideas off. I think when it comes to sort of talking about fees and money, like especially if you're coming from the teaching perspective and you haven't worked in-house at a publisher, you often don't know sort of what to expect to get paid for a project. So if you have someone that you feel comfortable saying, well, I've been offered this amount, does this seem okay for the sort of project and the size of the work and the time? I think that's really crucial, because if not, you have sort of nothing to go off except some of the guidance on sites like Publishing Professionals and CIEP. So a resource is really important, and networking. I would also say like LinkedIn as another form of networking, or any sort of social media. I think Instagram sort of coming up a little bit more in ELT. I don't tend to use Facebook, but LinkedIn and Instagram definitely are great for networking. And just, as I said, sort of building a brand around you and your niche. If you can sort of put yourself as a subject matter expert, whether that's with diversity and inclusion, special educational needs, things like that. For me, I would say that's assessment. Assessment is what I love. So yeah, when I do sort of teacher training and a lot of writing, it is mostly around assessment. So finding your lane, but not being afraid to try different things early on in your career, I think is really important.
Yeah.
I wrote a teacher's book for primary, which I'd never done before. And it was a really enjoyable experience. And I loved using my creativity in a different way. But I just know that sort of assessments and my black and white answers were more my path, really. But yeah, I think touching on what you said, joining something like Morsig is wonderful. Recently, I organised an event here in Edinburgh, where I live, for the Morsig group, just to meet with other Scottish freelancers, because a lot of the events are sort of in similar places around the world. So I thought, let's try somewhere new. And I met lots of people that I'm now regularly in contact with, all because of the Morsig meet as well. So 100% networking. And I think that also goes with sort of maintaining work and not being afraid to sort of say no to a project if it doesn't seem right for you, and not just saying yes to everything that comes, as we often do early on in our careers as freelancers. I think thinking about what it's going to do to you mentally if you sit there for 12, 15 hours a day, like I have done in the past, at all hours, just sitting there sort of rushing to get this deadline, and you learn from those experiences, and maybe not to take something on like that again, that's not beneficial to you. So just thinking about it from both perspectives, is it good for me, but will it also further my career too?
Yeah, one thing that I like about this materials writing, I don't know, groups or freelancers, etc., is that there's a lot of support, and you can always ask someone, about anything that you're not really sure about, how to go about, negotiating fees or deadlines. So I think it's such a supportive community, and that's, I think that's the most important thing for a freelancer, to have a supportive community. Definitely. So someone you can actually rely on, ask for advice, ask for help.
Yeah, I think ELT is very different in that respect to a lot of other industries, because the community is very supportive, as you said. People are willing to lift others up. If someone releases a course, we're willing to go on it and learn from each other as well. It's not, although we might be working in different areas, say I'm in assessment and someone else is in primary, that's a good thing, because we sort of lift each other up and we support each other. But even if you're working in the same lane, I still find that people lift each other up and are willing to promote each other. And that's really come through on the podcast as well. People are willing to share their expertise and their networks that they're using and their online resources as well. So yeah, it's really excellent. And another thing I would say is teaching, like you said, freelancing doesn't have to be your only hat that you wear. You know, I think it's really important not to lose sight of who you're creating these materials for. And whether that's teaching once a week, whether that's teaching once a month, or even if it's one class a day, online or face-to-face, I think that's really crucial. I'm volunteering teaching at the moment. I've been doing it for sort of the last 8 months with a guy who was in Guantanamo Bay for 21 years. And so he's had a very traumatic last couple of decades. And so it's a learning experience for me as well, because I'm learning how to teach in a different way for a different kind of student who's had sort of a traumatic experience in the past. So yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I think just keeping up to date with sort of students and what's going on in terms of teaching is really important to be a freelancer.
Yeah. And there's plenty of learning, right? In the freelancing process, because you learn from other materials writers, but you also learn, for example, from your students, right? Like what you're doing right now, you're learning from your student about something that you haven't had any experience with. So that's great. Yeah. So you also mentioned that you do a lot of teacher training. So what do you mainly focus on in these teacher training sessions?
Yeah, so I absolutely love teacher training. It's something that I really, as much as materials writing, feel really passionate about. I really speak about sort of assessments a lot, and also just how to create engaging exam classes, because I think there's a tendency to sort of, especially with like the first certificate, for example, at any of the Cambridge suite of exams, for people to just practice the exams, the time management, the task types and things like that. Whereas you can practice exam skills in an engaging way with games, with different activities. It doesn't need to be sort of that heads down approach all the time. So yeah, I'm really passionate about sort of bringing dynamism into different exam classes. So I do a lot of teacher training on that, and also a lot of the sort of materials that I've written for as well. So I was recently in Peru talking about the primary book that I sort of mentioned, because that's just been released, even though I worked on it many moons ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, so a lot of product launches, product talks, and yeah, just talking about how to be engaging in assessments. Essentially, that's where my main focus is.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, because, you know, as a teacher who prepares students for exams, I know how difficult it can be to kind of get them, you know, excited about all these different things connected to different exams. So yeah, I think it would be good even for me to go to one of your teacher training sessions and learn how to make my students happy, you know, while getting ready for an exam. Okay, and I know that you love podcasting, right? That's why you started ELTcpd podcast. So what have you learned during the last couple of years of doing it, of podcasting?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think when I first started a podcast, I'm going to be the first one to admit that I'd never listened to a podcast before. I didn't really know what it was about. I didn't know why people were so interested in it, but I thought I had ELTcpd floating around in my head for a while, and I just didn't know what to do with it. So I thought, shall I create a course? Shall I do some online teacher training? And then I thought, like we mentioned, the network, I think discussing issues and discussing different themes and topics with people who work in ELT was the way that I wanted to go, essentially, and was going to be successful. So I realized podcasting was a really good way to do that, because it's another form of teacher training. It's accessible to everyone who has an internet connection, and I just wanted it to be something that everyone could learn from, whether you're in my specific network, the speaker specific network, or whether you're not. You know, it's sort of spread far and wide now. We've had nearly 10,000 downloads in this year, so it's completely taken off. And I think that's because of the expert guests that we've had on that have been able to share their expertise, because of the different topics we've talked about, and the fact we've had them in mini series as well, so they appeal to different sort of people. And just, yeah, I think I've learned a lot, not only the technical side of things about sort of editing and having a backup recording, because I have lost episodes in the past, but also now just sort of taking this forward and knowing what it can be. So in the next year or so, we've got some exciting things coming up, and the first one is of course having video so we can actually see the speakers talking, but yeah, just doing some further training going forward. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's been on, including yourself, who is a wonderful guest, just sharing expertise.
Yeah, well, actually your podcast was my first podcast, as a guest. So, and it is kind of scary, I think, when you think about that, oh God, what am I going to say?
Definitely,
so lots of people will be listening to me, but then you kind of forget that it's being recorded, and you just keep chatting. So yeah, and I love your podcast because, as you said, you've had so many guests from that talk about different areas of ELT, and you can learn actually a lot from these episodes. So I think that you've been doing an amazing job. So you mentioned that you have some plans, right? For the next year. So can you tell us something about your plans? Can you reveal anything?
Still in the works, still in the brainstorming phase. But yeah, I'm hoping to do to combine sort of my teacher training and guests teacher training expertise that have been on, and sort of combining it, whether that goes down the route of a course, whether that goes down the route of sessions, and just building it into more of a CPD platform other than the podcasts. Definitely there will be a focus on conferences and a lot of the conference talks that are coming up, but yeah, I think now there's enough sort of traction behind it and a lot of interest in it that now we have the ability to grow and to grow it into more of a CPD platform, but still doing the free podcast for everyone. So one of the most popular series that we had was about going from teaching into publishing, whether that's materials writing, editing, project management. And I think it was Harry Waters' episode that had actually the most downloads. And so that's really interesting, because I think there's sort of a gap there for teachers going into materials writing, not necessarily the training side of things, but just things that I wish I had known when I'd started. So yeah, hopefully going forward there will be lots more CPD. So that's the next plan for next year.
Good. Well, I hope you do an episode like for example during the upcoming IATEFL conference in Harrogate in April, because I know you're coming.
Yes,
right,
absolutely. Yeah,
good.
As one half of Otter ELT, we're speaking about digital materials as part of the Morsig showcase. So yeah, it'll be really exciting, and my hope for that is to take the video further. So perhaps at the conferences I'll sort of be recording and interviewing experts on the spot. So
that would be great. Yeah. I think that would be great. Yeah,
I'll have to come and find you. Definitely.
Yeah, well, I'll be around, I have to be there, so
exactly.
I'm sure, we'll find time to chat.
Yeah.
So Billie, thank you so much for doing this interview with me, and thank you for inviting me to actually host it. I've never been in this role before, so it's a new experience for me. Thank you for that. And I hope we get a chance to do something like this again in the future. And I look forward to seeing you at the IATEFL conference next year.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on and being a guest interviewer. It's been wonderful. And yeah, definitely hope to see you at IATEFL and have a live interview with you in person. That'll be really great. Thank you so much.